Walter Eads loses the wheat in June. The hail takes it in 40 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon, and when it is done there is nothing left in the south field but broken stalks in standing water and a smell like cut grass going sour in the heat. The bank in Hayes has been patient. They have been patient the way a man is patient when the math is already done and he is simply waiting for the calendar. 63 days past due. Then 90. Then the letter comes. $2,000 by the 1st of August or the deed transfers. Walter reads it at the kitchen table where he has eaten breakfast every morning for 31 years. He sets it down. He picks it up and outside, the windmill turns in the south wind, and the south field is the color of straw, and the sky above it is the same wide Kansas blue it has always been. A man in a tan Stetson and a canvas jacket is sitting in the lobby of the First National Bank of Hayes with a cup of coffee that has gone cold, waiting on a location scout who is running 40 minutes late. He has nothing to do but watch the door. Here is the story. Walter Eads had come to that ground before he could drive a tractor. His father, Carl, had broken the first acre in 1921 with a team of horses borrowed from a neighbor named Purcell. And he had broken every acre after that with his own equipment. Built over 20 years of harvests that were good and harvests that were not, and one year, 1934, that was neither, because there was no harvest in 1934 for anyone in that part of Kansas. There was only wind and dust, and the particular silence of a man who has planted a field and watched the sky take it. Carl Eads had stayed. A lot of men didn't. Carl had stayed, and when he died in 1947, he left Walter a deed, a John Deere tractor with a cracked block that Walter fixed himself over the winter, and 240 acres of wheat ground north of Hayes that had been in the family for 26 years. Walter had farmed it ever since. 31 years in that ground by the spring of 1959. He had learned the field the way a man learns a language slowly, by necessity, until he stopped translating and started. He knew which corners flooded in a wet April, and which rises came out of the ground first, and which fence rows held the most snow in February and released the most moisture in March. He knew the field the way his father had known it. He had taught his son James to know it the same way. His wife Ruth had died in 1953. Pneumonia January, the coldest week of the year. Walter had paid the doctor's bills through the spring and summer of 1954, one envelope at a time, driving the 30 miles to Hayes in the pickup and walking into the office and paying whatever he had that week. He did not tell James about the bills. James was 14 and had enough to carry. By 1958, the mortgage was current. It had been current for 4 years, and Walter had begun to think about whether James might want to take over the ground someday, whether the farm could support 2 families, whether there was enough there for a second generation. He had been thinking about it when the spring planting went in. He was still thinking about it when the hail came in June. The letter from the bank said 2000. It said August 1st. It said the terms had been clear throughout, and the bank had extended every courtesy available, and the matter would now proceed as written if the amount was not received. The man at the bank who had written the letter was named Gerald Pryor. He was not a hard man. He was a careful one. He had a board to answer to, and a ledger that did not accommodate sentiment, and $2,000 past due on a farm note was $2,000 past due regardless of who had signed it or how long the name had been on the deed. Pryor had seen 20 farms go through this process in his 12 years at that bank. He was sorry about each one the same way and for the same amount of time, which was not very long and not very deep, because the ledger was the ledger. Walter Eads had driven to Hayes on the morning of July 14th to ask if there was a payment arrangement that could be made. He wore the same suit jacket he had worn to Ruth's funeral. He had his hat in his hand before he got through the door. He sat in the chair across from Gerald Pryor's desk, and he explained about the hail and the south field and the 40 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon. And Pryor listened to all of it, and when Walter was finished, Pryor opened the folder on his desk and turned it so Walter could see the column of figures, and he explained what the board had authorized and what it had not. $2,000. August 1st. Walter looked at the column of figures for a long... He was 63 years old, and he had farmed that ground for 31 years, and he had buried his wife 6 years ago, and he had a son who knew every corner of every field, and he did not have $2,000, and he was not going to have $2,000 by August 1st. He put his hat back on. He thanked Pryor for his time. He stood in the lobby and looked at his hat brim for a moment, the way a man does when he is deciding something or trying not to decide something, and then he sat down in one of the chairs along the wall because his legs had gone uncertain and he needed a minute before he drove back. 3 other men were in that lobby. A young couple at the teller window. A farmer in overalls near the door. Not one of them looked at Walter. The teller counted bills with her eyes down. The clock on the wall above the vault door moved. The man in the tan Stetson, in the chair by the front window, was watching. If you've ever seen a man carry 30 years of work out a door in his hat, drop a comment below. Drop your state. This one deserves. He did not move right away. He watched Walter sit. He watched the set of the old man's shoulders. He watched the way Walter's hands rested on his knees, not folded, not clasped, just resting. The hands of a man who had stopped making a fist about something because there was no point anymore. He set his cold coffee down on the side table. He stood the way a man stands when the decision is already made and the body is just catching up. No hurry. No announcement. He walked across the lobby the way he walked across every piece of ground he had ever worked, like the floor belonged to him, and he had nowhere better to be. He stopped in front of Walter. Walter looked up. The man said, "What they tell you?" Walter said the figure. He said it plainly, the way a farmer says a measurement. The man looked at the door to Pryor's office. He said, "Give me a minute." Gerald Pryor looked up when the door opened without a knock. The man came in and closed the door and stood in the middle of the room and looked at Pryor with an attention that was not hostile and not warm, and did not leave any particular room for small talk. Pryor recognized him about 3 seconds into the silence. His hand moved toward the phone and then moved away again. The man said, "Walter Eads." Pryor said, "I understand your concern, but the terms, how much of the $2,000 is interest and penalties?" Pryor opened the folder. He said $340. The man said, "Then the actual arrears are $1,660. Pryor said that was correct. The man reached into the inside pocket of his canvas jacket. He set an envelope on the desk. He said, "Count it." Pryor counted it. It was $2,000. He counted it again. The man said, "Write the receipt to Walter Eads, current through the end of the year." He said it the way a man reads a line off a page that has already been written. Pryor said, "The overage applies to the next payment due. Write the receipt." Something moved across Pryor's face. Not shame. Not quite. He picked up his pen. He wrote the receipt. He slid it across the desk. The man picked it up. He looked at it once. He folded it and put it in his jacket pocket and walked out. Walter Eads does not stand up when the man comes back. He watches him cross the lobby. He watches him stop. The man holds out the receipt and Walter takes it and reads it. He reads it again. The lobby clock moves. The teller's window is empty now. The farmer in overalls has gone. Walter looks up. His mouth opens. He gets one word out. And then he stops, because there is no word that fits, and the ones he knows are too small, and it wouldn't be right to use them anyway. The man says, "I have 12 pictures in the can, and I still need one that looks like a Kansas wheat farm in the morning." He says, "I don't suppose you'd let me bring a crew out." Walter looks at him. "Not a favor," the man says. "I have a problem. It takes a while before a man's own hands will believe something." Walter's hands were still on his knees. They did not move for a long time. He said yes. The man nodded once and put on his hat and walked out of the First National Bank of Hayes and got into a truck that was idling at the curb and drove south toward the highway. Walter sat in that chair until his legs were ready. Then he drove home. He parked in the same spot he had parked in for 31 years. He sat in the truck for a while. Then he went inside. He put the receipt on the kitchen table where the letter had been. The film crew came out the following Thursday. They were there 2 days. They shot the windmill in the south field and the long straight road that ran along the east, and at the end of the second day one of the younger crew members asked Walter about the farm, and Walter told him about his father and the borrowed team of horses in 1921. And the young man wrote some of it down in a small notebook. Walter farmed that ground for 19 more years after that summer. James took over in 1978. He had known every corner of every field since he was 8 years old, and he knew it better now. And he farmed it the way his father and his grandfather had farmed it, which is to say he showed up before the sun and stayed after it and did not say much about either. He expanded the operation in 1983, buying the 80 acres to the west that had come available when old Purcell's grandson decided not to farm. The same Purcell whose horses Carl Eads had borrowed in 1921 to break the first acre. James's daughter Carol grew up in that house. She learned the field the way her father had learned it, the way her grandfather had learned it. She studied agricultural science at Kansas State, graduated in 1991, and came back. She farms 480 acres today, the original 240, plus a parcel to the north that her father bought in 1989. She has 2 boys who come out on weekends and already know which corners flood in a wet April. There is a receipt framed on the wall of the farmhouse kitchen. It is dated July 14, 1959. It says Walter Eads, current through December 31, 1959. The ink has gone pale, but the figures are still clear. It hangs beside a photograph of Carl Eads standing in front of the windmill in 1938, squinting into the sun, and a school photograph of James at about 12 years old. And a wedding photograph of Carol and her husband taken in the south field on a September afternoon when the wheat was already. The morning light comes through the east window of that kitchen at about 6:45 and crosses the receipt, and then moves to the photograph, and then to the wall, and then goes. The receipt stays. John Wayne never told anyone what he did in the lobby of that bank in Hays, Kansas. Not the director he went back to work with that afternoon. Not the location scout who had been late. Not in any interview he gave in 1959 or any year after. Not in any letter anyone ever found. Some men move through the world looking for the people the room has already decided not to see. They do not do it because they are watched. They do not do it because someone will remember. They do it because they are that kind of man at 6 in the morning, and at noon, and at the end of a long day when nobody is keeping score. And the only difference between those moments and the one in that lobby is that someone happened to need it. That is the whole of it. If this story reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't yet. There are more stories like this one, and every one of them deserves to be told. And unfortunately, they don't make men like John Wayne.